Hey everybody, it's Uyak here, back another video. With Made in Abyss Season 2 just ending, I don't think there's any better time to talk about the impactful characters in this season than now. And we are going to start off first by talking about one of the characters that probably had the worst fate in this season, Irumyuui. But before we get into that, if you do enjoy this video, in the top right is a playlist that includes all of the Made in Abyss videos that I have made, including episode reviews on this newest season. Also, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for further anime content in the future. Let's get straight into it. We first meet Irumyuui when the Ganju crew lands on the Made in Abyss island, and as they land on this island, they actually come into contact with this ancient tribe. And Bailiff is communicating with the tribe leader, and as he's communicating with the tribe leader, we see this scene of Irumyuui kind of hiding from everybody else. And this is because she is an outcast, which we find out shortly after in a scene of where the Ganju crew is getting ready to descend into the abyss, and Vuako notices a child sniffing on her, which happens to be Irumyuui. Now, weirded out by this child that is kind of sniffing Vuako, they decide to inspect Irumyuui, and as they're inspecting Irumyuui, they notice she has a bunch of tattoos on her back, and Bailiff translates this to basically meaning that Irumyuui cannot bear children, therefore she is exiled into the abyss. Now, this is one of the interesting parts about Irumyuui, because we're already heard of something traumatic happening to her. She was exiled to the abyss because she cannot bear children. Now, does this mean that she can't bear children because the primitive tribe tried to mate with her or not? This is up for contention, because there is one viewpoint of that the tribe tried to mate with her, and there's evidence backing this, as her big brothers and such were super nice to her until they found out that she couldn't bear children. And there's also the fact that she came of age and then they found it out. So usually coming of age in a lot of different societies means that that person is now open in terms of having intercourse and reproducing and things such as that. But there's also the viewpoint of that this tribe thought she was cursed and they inspected her, and that's why they knew she couldn't bear children. But this is honestly up to what you decide was the case. But in my personal opinion, seeing everything that happened in Made in Abyss in this season, I think it's pretty logical to come to the conclusion that this primitive tribe tried to mate with Irumyuui and eventually threw her out, which is honestly the start of a very, very disgusting story. Irumyuui then throughout the story shows that she's a part of the crew, and she played a vital part in being a guide through the abyss. She actually develops this relationship with Vuako that is sort of like a mother-daughter relationship, because once again her whole family threw her out, so she's looking for a new mother figure. And through hearing the conversations of Irumyuui and Vuako, we find out that Irumyuui's sole desire is basically to have children. She wanted to have children, and throughout these journeys with the Ganju crew, Irumyuui actually adopted a hermit pet. She found this pet, and shortly after finding this pet was actually eaten by a predator. I mean, this just goes to show you that everything good that happens to her turns out into something terrible. And this is continued on in the fact that while the crew was trying to establish themselves in the 6th layer, they actually thought this water source was a good water source because there was nothing wrong with it. There was no minerals. It didn't seem to have any diseases. And as we know, this turned out to be the thing that eventually led to their end. And Irumyuui was unfortunately affected by this disease. I mean, we saw scenes in the anime of her having this diarrhea that was just disgusting, filled with eggs in it and stuff. And I mean, this terrible thing was happening to her. But if you thought that was terrible, just wait to hear what happens next. After the crew found the Cradle of Desires and what they're used for, their last hope was essentially to give this Cradle of Desire to Irumyuui. And this is where everything terrible kicked off for Irumyuui, because in giving her this egg, I mean, they all thought that her wish was going to be to save the crew. But unfortunately, Irumyuui's wish was to have children, because that's her sole desire. We have to keep in mind here that this is a child. This is not someone who has a sensible foundation and makes intellectual decisions that are considered smart. I mean, this is a child, a literal child. So it makes sense as to why she would wish to have children. And even more unfortunate than that is in this wish, I mean, the thing that she turned into was absolutely, Jesus, I don't know how you would describe this, but she essentially turned into this big blob and had so many deformities. I mean, this is something terrible that could happen to a child. I mean, honestly, this is a fate worse than death, and even more so than turning into this disgusting thing. Yes, it saved her life taking this cradle of desire, but was it truly worth it? Because after she turned into this creature, she started birthing children. And unfortunately for her, her children were dying a day after they were born. They were dying, and she kept having children and they were dying. And keep in mind, at this point, the Ganja crew is still dying. Everybody in the crew is still dying. So they're relying on Irumyuui, and this is where Wazukan makes the decision to actually start eating Irumyuui's children. And imagine that her sole desire was to have children, and then watching someone take away your sole desire and eat them after they're born. Imagine as a mother seeing your children taken away after they're born and ate. I mean, this is a terrible thing that happened to her, and she had to witness all of this. In fact, this developed even further because she kept transforming into this thing, into her wish, eventually developing to the point where you can even distinguish her from a big pink pillar, because that's essentially what she became. She lost all of her abilities to think, to essentially move like a human would move. The only thing she could do would make like crying noises or have temper tantrums every single time her child was taken from her, rightfully so. And as Vuako is examining Irumyuui one day, she notices that there is actually a second cradle of desire inside of her, and she asked Wazukan about this, and he said that he implanted this into her. He gave it to her because he thought Irumyuui was going to die. He essentially prolonged her suffering in order to sustain the livelihood of this group at the expense of a child that can't even be considered a child at this point. This led to Irumyuui moving. Yes, this big pink pillar of some sort moved, and I don't know exactly where she was moving to, but she moved to this certain place. And when she moved there, Bailiff was finally done with this treacherous cycle of having to consume a child's children. I mean, I don't think this is anything any sane human would be able to live with, and Bailiff was done with it. In fact, he told Irumyuui to essentially consume him, and that is what she did. She consumed him and revamped him into this hollow, as well as all of the other Ganja members. And in doing this, after she created the village, this is when she used the second cradle of desire. The cradle of desire to create Faputa. And Faputa's sole wish, sole desire, is Irumyuui's desire, and is to get vengeance, right? Imagine all the things that happened to Irumyuui. Her mind was demented to the point where the only thing she could think of as a child is to want to kill every single person that wronged her. As a child, that was her sole desire. And then the torment is not even done there, because when she essentially revamped these villagers into hollows, they used her as a village. That's the space they could only exist in. And she became this hollow village. Not only did all these terrible things happen to her, but it continued on with the fact that she had to defend every single person that did this to her, and she didn't get the sympathy of dying a peaceful death. At the end of the season, we see the village be destroyed, and this was Faputa's purpose as well, to destroy the village, and that's essentially what she did, to put Irumyuui out of her suffering. Because we have to realize the fact that this village was Irumyuui. Irumyuui was not dead. Irumyuui was alive. She was the village. And Faputa's purpose was to destroy her and the villagers. I mean, all Irumyuui wanted to do was live a fulfilling life and to have a lot of children as her mother did. And I honestly don't think that's too much to ask for, but it didn't turn out that way because she happened to be infertile, whether or not you want to chalk that down to them experimenting with her or them inspecting her, and she was exiled from her family into the abyss. But luckily for her, she happened to find the Ganja crew, and she thought these people were her new family, and she went and found a new mother in Vuako. But it turned out that once the crew got the disease or infection from this water, that they turned to using the Cradle of Desires on Irumyuui and essentially turned her into this mass of birthing creatures just for them to be ate right in front of her. And even more so than that, she couldn't even find the satisfaction of being able to be released from her suffering, because she had to live out her days as the village for these people that not only wronged her but used her continuously with essentially not enough mercy to put her out of her misery. So she had to do it herself. This is what makes Made in Abyss such a great anime, because the characters' lives are realistic. They make sense in the fact that you're not always going to live a happy life and get a happy ending as in most of the majority of these animes. I mean, this is just not how it works in the real world and in an environment like in Made in Abyss's environment. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for similar anime content in the future. I will see you in the next video.